I've been telling people not to take my word for it. I wouldn't. But I don't expect you to read all the ins and outs of the science on climate and the scholarship on collapse risk. To help you understand how this is not just a marginal view, I could tell you about the heads of global consulting firms, former heads of UN agencies, senior folks in the EU, amongst hundreds of others who've been getting in touch privately, agreeing with my conclusions. But rather than that, we can simply recall the strangeness of ice creams and sunbathing in the UK during the February just gone. The weather has already changed and will continue to do so in ways that destabilise both wild nature and agriculture. There is crying to come, there is dismay, there is despair, there is anger. But then after that, it's worth remembering that we aren't in imminent danger. There's no need for a panicked response. We have some years ahead of us. But that doesn't mean we can get out of this. I think we won't. By that I mean we're likely to experience exorbitant prices, shortages of necessities, reactionary and authoritarian politics, bouts of civil unrest, and international wars that will result from such stresses. Dad, when we last discussed this topic, you said I should give people some hope. I've thought about this and believe that hope is acting as an escape from reality. For most people, it involves wishing that something is not so. I'm discovering I don't need hope. Instead of hope, I have a sense of what is important to life, whatever may come, which for me is mainly about truth, love, and courage. I think hope can sometimes be a lie to postpone letting reality change us. Instead, I know many of us will do good stuff amidst all the bad. So I never sent that letter, and I didn't send it because I thought, like, what would my mum and what would my dad do with this information? They're in their mid-70s and they didn't have too many options of how to respond to this analysis, this outlook. So I thought I should just live what I'm telling them in this letter, because writing this letter helped me really try and condense, well, what does it actually mean if I'm just trying to get this across to a loved one? The title of my book, Breaking Together, means two things. First is that the systems we rely on in modern societies are all breaking together at the same time. And that means collapse is an appropriate term, because we're not going to fix things. The future is going to be very different. And but the second meaning of breaking together is that that doesn't mean that we just try and fight for ourselves and look out for ourselves in some sort of panicked Mad Max response, but that we try and collaborate to try and make the best of a bad situation.
Vijftig jaar geleden, ik zat nog op de lagere school, kreeg ik voor het eerst te horen hoe slecht het er met de natuur voor stond. Maar deze waarschuwing ging altijd samen met het geven van een oplossing, van hoe het tij nog te keren was. Nu iedereen om zich heen ziet dat het klimaat inderdaad snel aan het veranderen is, lijkt het meer op 11:55. Het boek van Bendell beschrijft in detail hoe het zover heeft kunnen komen. Het lezen ervan maakt me niet vrolijk. Is Jem Bendell de zoveelste onheilsprofeet? Of kunnen we uit al dat slechte nieuws toch nog hoop putten?
In the first hearing of this message from Jem, I was furious. And because I knew that if I was to be taking what he said seriously, then it would change my life entirely. I knew that, and I didn't want that to happen. I wanted to stay in my life, in what I knew as safe. I wanted to stay safe, and wanted to leave and get back to my children. What I experienced in that moment was not me as a politician or as a leader or as anything, but me as a mother, hearing news about the existential threat for our children. It was overwhelming, and I was very angry, actually, at first with Jem.
I think a big thing for me was the year 1988 in the UK. Environmentalism was in the mainstream. For the first time in my life, I was, 16 years old back then. So the Green Party did really well in the European elections. There was a lot of news on the television about the Amazon rainforest and the losses there, and the violence against indigenous peoples. And Greenpeace was making headlines trying to stop the dumping of nuclear waste in the North Sea. And I was at an age where I was, like anyone in their teens, is looking for meaning and purpose. Yeah, it seemed natural for me to express that through being an environmentalist. So I even remember when it was during a summer job that summer, I remember one moment looking at the sky and saying, okay, God, the world will be my church, and my work will be my worship. It was basically environmental work, and I knew then that that's it. So this is my meaning to life, to be an environmentalist.
So I've been made a Professor of Sustainability Leadership, which is, Google tells me, is the first in the world. And I've been encouraged to try and keep things straightforward and simple today. So I thought, how will I sort of explain that? How do I summarize it? I was very fortunate to come across this nice summary. More trees, less arseholes. It's clearly a bit more complicated than that. But I think when we hear about all these big problems, it can be sort of feel somewhat far away from us. So I'd like to bring it into the here and now. So this is what we've done together in the last day, in the last 24 hours. 80,000 acres of tropical forest chopped down. 150 species gone extinct in the last day, just like every single day. 1 million tons of toxic waste released into our air and water just in the last 24 hours, like every 24 hours. So sustainability is shorthand for trying to fix all that and certainly not make it worse. At most, it's about creating conditions for us to thrive in harmony with each other and the planet. And so sustainability leadership is about working out why are all these problems happening and what we can do to help fix them.
Yeah, when I said that, it was in the narrative structure of please be awake to how bad the situation is right now. So let's all change, and we can change, and it can be stopped, it can be fixed, it can be turned around. And it can be turned around by people like you sitting in an audience, listening to people like me with the job I've got, wearing a suit and being all corporate and sounding successful and sounding agentic and heroic. It's all part of that narrative. When I was working with my artist friend on the cover for Breaking Together, I thought, which part of the book could I represent, which would sort of capture something of the philosophy of the whole message? And I thought, well, then the the Kintsugi Atlas idea came to me. So Atlas, the Titan god, Greek god, it's a reminder of sort of this anthropocentric, human-centered sense of who we are, that everything depends on us, and life is a struggle, and that's a bit of a curse. But it's a paradox, because it also means it's kind of nice that people care about the whole world, but it also is this, the warning in that myth is what can go wrong from that. So yeah, for me, this anthropocentric, human-centered story of our culture, that we're in control, that progress exists, will always happen and is good, that's breaking. And so we don't just ditch it completely, we see what can we learn from it and what can we put back together. My name's Jem. Some of you, hands up who was here for my book launch in October? There you go, quite a few. So that's where the idea for this group was born, Bali Beyond Collapse. For whatever reason you come to a conclusion that globalization is coming to an end, industrial consumerism is breaking apart. From that point, how do you be useful, be creative, make a positive difference? The inner and outer. So how can
Jem heeft Engeland verlaten en is verhuisd naar Indonesië. Maar ook hier brengt hij mensen samen die de ineenstorting van de wereld, zoals we die nu kennen, serieus willen nemen. Ze zoeken inspiratie bij elkaar door te vertellen waar ze mee bezig zijn.
But I have a food forest class once a week in Ubud now. It's access for everyone. Bring your local, bring your gardener. I need to spread this message and you can do your own. That's all. Thank you. It's just because we doesn't know what is that, and we always keep busy to thinking to connect with our technology, and we forget to really going to see down what's in the earth, what's growing here. This is all the food. So how to really see this as the essence of your life, that we really need them.
So for a while I was living a double life. One was the all about innovation, systemic change through innovation, and then the other life was me taking time to look at the climate science. On the one hand, maintaining the successful, globe-trotting, UN-speaking person who had lots of books on corporate sustainability and had been recognised by the World Economic Forum. And on the other hand, there was this other me, questioning everything and going, oh my God, it looks like it's too late. There's too much momentum in the ocean and climate system for us to avoid an ecological catastrophe and therefore catastrophe for human societies. So I had these two things going on. And but what that meant was it brought a new radicalism to what I was doing in my more mainstream work. So the example was, I was actually the keynote speaker at a conference at the UN on blockchain and currency innovation and all that. And yet I was personally traumatized by the climate science I was reading. So I know what's expected, which is to raise everyone up, make everyone feel good about coming. There were 700 people likely to be in this big room. And the funders would expect that of me. And my colleagues who were working together with me to organize this event would expect that of me. And I feel like standing up and saying, oh my God, this is scary. Wow, unless any of this technology we're doing is actually going to really tackle root causes of the problems, we've got no chance of doing anything helpful. We're just going to have our foot on the accelerator, smashing into that wall. What a difference a few years makes. I remember in 2012, I was in Davos at the World Economic Forum, and I was wandering the corridors wide-eyed and excitedly talking to anyone who would listen about the opportunity from digital currencies and blockchain. And I remember being looked at like a lunatic, even by the tech entrepreneurs there. And so 6 years later, here we are at the United Nations. I might still seem a bit like a lunatic to some, but at least I've got a bigger crowd now. And a smarter one at that. The latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, I think, invites a reprioritization. It implies that climate change is now a planetary emergency posing an existential threat to humanity. We need to wake up to why we've been so incapable of changing our ways collectively at scale. Despite decades of deliberation and initiative, including in these buildings, carbon emissions continue to rise. The reaction was Extinction Rebellion put it on their YouTube channel. They just started. They liked the message, which was basically we're lying to ourselves. That was a big part of the message, was that we're lying to ourselves. And we need to look again at the science, look again at the situation, accept failure of decades of efforts. That tells us something. And then allow ourselves to rethink what we're doing and who we are.
So I wanted to introduce Jem because he's the one that told me the truth. And it was, I think I witnessed one of the most courageous acts I've ever witnessed at any conference ever and could ever witness. It's so hard to be the bell ringer. That's what you all are. And that's what Jem is. In a most prolific way. Thank you, Jem. And I think that's why we need each other. That's why we need to ask each other for help. That's why we lean in. That's what we activate in each other. And Jem has activated that in me and in so many thousands of people. So I introduce you to Professor Jem Bendell. Thank you, Jem.
So yes, you heard I'm an academic, I'm a professor, and in my field we're meant to be discovering truths and sharing them. But what I discovered is to do that you have to be brave enough to let yourself see the truth for yourself. For 20 years I was slaving away working to try and make business and finance a little bit kinder to people and planet. And because I was doing that, I got somewhere in my career. And I've been invited to give talks around the world to audiences of businesses and banks, basically the same story being, well done, but let's try a little bit harder. A couple of years ago, I was invited to give a keynote talk at an event on climate and business, and I felt sick. I felt I can't go along and give another pep talk to say, let's just try a bit harder. I realized that we were failing and that the system that we're in is going to fail, and we can no longer continue talking about effectively tinkering around the edges. So I ditched my speech and I gave a talk where I said, it's too late to change this system. We have to be brave enough to admit to ourselves that we have to have a different kind of conversation about what to do next, even if it feels like we have no idea what that means. We have to be brave enough to start that conversation. So we've come out on the streets today to raise the alarm. We knew climate change was coming, but we didn't know how fast. So the truth for me is, I'm sorry, but the future of our climate is not now under our control. So what do we do? Go home? No. We gather and rebel, not with a vision of a fairy tale future where we fix the climate, but because it's right to do what we can, it's right to try and reduce harm, it's right to try and save what we can, and it's right to try and live the way we believe in.
Do you understand?
How did you get here?
Your car picked me up.
You're in a car? Okay.
Yes.
Have you got TV at home?
Can you tell me the
Sorry,
point
hang
you're
on,
trying
just
to
answer my
make,
question.
Piers?
Have you got a TV at home?
Because again, Piers, we're not talking about the real
I'm
issue.
talking about it. Answer my question.
I'd like to invite you
Simply
to
answer.
come to a rebellion.
With respect, answer my question.
Piers.
Do you have a TV at home?
I don't think that's relevant.
Do your kids use iPads and computers?
It's
yes
not
or no?
relevant to.
Can you answer these questions?
It's not relevant to the planetary
Do you have air
emergency.
conditioning? Do they have it in their schools?
Piers,
Do you walk your kids to school?
Your children.
Do you see
and
the
my
problem
children,
with all this? You go on about my kids can't get out of bed because they're all so terrified. I'm not surprised they're terrified because your mum's telling them every day the planet's about to end. And yet, I bet your own carbon footprint on all the stuff I've just mentioned is terrible.
Yeah, it's very hard to be the bell ringer. It takes an enormous emotional toll to withstand people's aggression. I remember those early weeks of Extinction Rebellion, early months, sharing the news with my friends and my family. It was devastatingly hard. You try and invalidate or discredit. The news is so terrible, you need to make it wrong. You need to make it wrong, and you need to make the person wrong. So Piers was trying to make me wrong, and one of the you shame someone, and and as the bell ringer or as someone that is carrying a message, a kind of message we've been carrying in Extinction Rebellion and that Jem has been carrying. My goodness, you need good support systems in your life, and you need time and space to process all of those reactions coming to you, and that's been actually where we've landed in XR, which is now we're working on something called Being the Change. That's exactly what we're working with in terms of having a vision that can hold people together and keep people together and repair, that people can come together and repair their places and their waters and their relationships. So, yeah.
Another important thing to understand about why societal collapse is an appropriate term for what's going on is that we live in hyper-complex societies. We live in industrial consumer societies. And so we can't simply just shrink, because so many of the consumer goods we use require mass industrial production. And so the economics just fall apart if people aren't buying as much, or if there's problems with the supply chain providing one component or one material. So this is where an actual collapse in production is possible because of these hyper-complex systems that we depend on. That somewhat parallels natural systems, oddly, which is that ecosystems don't just continually degrade year on year. At some point, the interrelationships snap, and an ecosystem can just collapse, and therefore our habitat changes entirely. And this is, so when we look at, say, climatic changes, people talk about tipping points. And so one of them would be a certain amount of loss of sea ice, which would therefore mean that so much more of the sun's energy would be absorbed into the darker oceans because it's not being reflected back into space. So once you lose the sea ice to a certain extent, then you've got self-reinforcing warming, what some people call runaway warming, which reminds us that it becomes something that we can't effectively do much about, which is the scary thing.
Een mogelijk domino-effect van omvallende systemen waar Jem over spreekt, deed zich wereldwijd voor tijdens de coronapandemie. Op Bali, dat zich bijna afhankelijk heeft gemaakt van toerisme, kwam al snel armoede. Maar er stonden ook manieren om zo'n crisis samen te verzachten. Een voorbeeld daarvan voor Jem zijn deze zeewierkwekers. Tijdens de lockdown pakten ze hun verdwijnende traditionele manier van telen weer op. Het is een teelt die al heel lang organisch is en haalt ook nog eens heel veel CO2 uit de lucht.
Susah cari gini cari apa nanam rumput siwit gitu dan bahasa Indonesia nanam rumput laut waktu dia kecil dibawa ke sini digendong sambil gini ngambil rumput lautnya.
Seaweed definitely changed because before COVID, people stopped doing seaweed because the prices went down significantly. So they don't make money, they're actually losing money. But during the pandemic, the only thing that actually, provide is seaweed farming. So everybody start doing it again, and then price went up during the pandemic for 1 year, which is really good for the farmer. But since the borders open, the price now went down again. For now, we have one product that we call Good Karma, that we mix it with smoothie, basically. So what we do after we harvest the fresh seaweed, so we dry this one for 3 days, and then after that we're gonna process them by cut them into small cube, and then packaging, and then we send it to the restaurant.
We've done so much damage to the biosphere and changed the climate so much already that we've got a catastrophe ahead. And that's just words, isn't it? But this is really painful when you really look at it. And that means that young people today are going to have a terrible time. It means that you and I, in a few years' time, may be having a much more scary life than we do right now. Taking that on board freed me from conforming to what society wanted from me. Freed me from the idea I need to be successful in academia or in the UN or in all the other jobs I've had. I couldn't give a shit about that anymore. That's great. I mean, other people don't give a shit about it anyway, but I needed death and destruction to just make me escape all these social pressures and just think, well, what do I believe in?
As an academic, an analyst and an IPCC author. So first, Stella, over to you.
So when I started to doubt everything I was doing, then that wasn't just a doubt about maybe I should change job. It was going much deeper than that, making me question everything and how would I have self-respect. So yeah, that was big, and that was for me. That was part of the despair. Then it was not just despair of the state of the planet, but then and it's kind of like a despair about who am I? Am I worth anything? Have I done anything useful? I knew that once I got my book out, Breaking Together, I just really wanted to get on with living my life differently according to how I see the world. So I really wanted to get into regenerative agriculture, not just for myself, but to help people who are smallholders who want to do that themselves, to help them do it. Ooh, doing well. Yeah.
Als ik zo achter hem aanloop in deze prachtige tuin, vraag ik me toch af waarom hij dit eigenlijk niet in Engeland is begonnen.
So I'm not going to lie about it. The economics is a big reason why I've moved here. If I was rich enough to do something like this where I'm from, maybe I would have stayed. But it's such a blessing to have discovered Bali and the people I work with here and the whole culture. It's an invitation to reverence and gratitude for being alive, just being in nature here. And for them, there's that kind of presence and that reverence. They have ritual and ceremony around watercourses, waterfalls and springs, and all their calendar is attuned to, the moon and so on. It's all very, very present to natural reality rather than telling stories separate from that. So it's a real invitation to celebrate getting your hands dirty, getting stuck in with nature as you find it.
Well, of course, I would like Jem to be here, helping on a day-to-day basis with, the work there is to do around protection and repairing, and but he's doing that work in Bali, and there is a certain amount. I think it's really worth saying, especially if you want to have this off camera, that there is a privilege in what he's chosen. Many people don't have that privilege, and I think it's important to recognise that and say, yes, okay, he has this privilege. He's made use of this privilege, but again, it's what we do with that privilege that we're afforded. But I think for those of us that are in judgment about the people who are bringing this message, including Jem, I think it would be more powerful for us to understand why that judgment is happening and what we can do about the reality that we're being confronted with.
Kemudian karena mungkin pemerintah ingin memajukan, karena mungkin programnya
Okay. So you'll translate for you? Okay. So, a huge welcome to the Beckense Farm Training Centre. It's not even a year since we took a lease on this land and started out with the vision of working with local NGOs to promote organic farming in Bali, to remove chemicals from the process to create healthier farming and healthier food.
Ya, kita juga ingin kenalan ini ya. Bisa? Boleh?
They want to introduce themselves. Where they're from, where the group of farmers.
Well, everyone, so I'd sit down and you translate and I hear from everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll sit down and listen. Yeah.
Kita juga sepakat tidak saja soal pangan,
Not about food.
Tetapi soal lingkungan, air yang bagus, udara yang bersih.
Water, air pollution.
Ya, supaya itu kita punya dari teman-teman petani.
How we want to make it better.
Suatu saat saya undang Beckense ya ke tempat-tempat kami.
I think it's only when I leave the environment I'm used to living in and go back to a big city that I realise how living this life has changed me, like at a deeper level. So London used to be where I'd go all the time for events, for parties, to see friends, and I wouldn't think twice, and I'd be quite excited going to London. Last time I was there, it was to give a talk about my new book, and I had a panic attack walking. I walked across London. I decided to walk, and it was a Friday night, walking through the city, and all these people coming out of their banks, all dressed in their blue stiff-collared shirts and shiny black shoes, and being all confident, going off to the bar, and it just freaked me out in a way I'd never experienced before. Yeah, and I talked about it in front of a bunch of people, and I thought, I feel so alienated now from this environment because I see how fragile it is. You're so far away from the base of the supply chain. This lifestyle is entirely dependent on a pyramid of exploitation that stretches around the entire globe, and it could break at any moment because it's already under such strain. And I felt alienated because I no longer believe in that it's kind of good and right to protect that pyramid of exploitation, to sustain these pinnacles of consumption like the life in London. I didn't realise I would to feel so alien in an urban environment, which is what living closer to the soil has done for me. And I said it without judgment. I said, this is just what's happened to me. I don't think that means that therefore you're all wrong. It's just what's happened to me. I've changed, and so I feel far more at peace, closer to nature, and also, I think, on some level, closer to a source of my sustenance.
Vanuit zijn proeftuin onderhoudt Jem contact met studenten en mensen waarbij hij inspiratie zoekt. Een van hen is Joanna Macy, een Amerikaanse milieuactiviste die zich sinds de jaren 70 onvermoeibaar inzet voor de verbinding te midden van crisis.
So you're a Buddhist, and I was wondering.
I don't use that term.
You don't use the term. How would you describe yourself?
I'm a person who loves the teachings and practices of the Buddha.
I was wondering how Buddhist philosophy and also Buddhist practices finding helpful as this destruction of life on Earth seems to be coming to our own doorstep.
We've been given this beautiful life, this beautiful planet. If you let yourself really love it, if you let yourself be open to what the ancient ones and the indigenous people and the contemporary science, this is a living planet, you can find that you can grow your life in widening circles that reach out across the world. You're that big. We're liberated from that little prison cell of the ego. And then when you're in widening circles, you see pain. Oh, yes, you do. But you see also the beauty of this planet out of which we grow. Then we aren't coming out. I don't believe we're coming from anywhere else. We weren't manufactured. So you see, what's falling apart is a demented system. It is a system, a political economic system of the industrial growth society. They are commodifying our mother. They're breaking her up and devouring that. So this needs to be destroyed. This needs to come apart, not be destroyed, but and so we look at this, how can we love this world as this demented and destructive political economy dies? We go into a system, what we call in systems thinking, positive disintegration. So that the soft, sensitive skin and fingertips, so that the vulnerable parts, eyes and lips and ears, can grow so that we can grow in connection. It's only to connect. We grow and learn in connection. And the industrial growth society forgot about that, because you can't build connection in a factory.
So welcome back, everybody. It's a bit of background noise here because it's a huge rainstorm, which I'm loving because it's been pretty much a drought in Bali since August last year, and so it's weird in terms of parts. I had the parts work we did. Then actually also there's two different identities and worldviews I've had. One was as the person who just wanted it to be sunny so I wouldn't get drenched on my motorbike. But ever since I became a farmer, it's like, rain! Yay! So this session is called Hope and Vision in the Face of Collapse. I think it's really helpful because we're approaching this in the context of leadership and communication. Many people also think that not having a positive vision means that one does not hope for anything at all, and can't therefore fully work towards something. Many people also think that not hoping for anything is a problem rather than it being liberating. So there's this general idea that hope is good and necessary. And away from modernist culture, wisdom traditions teach us something completely different. I'm just going to mention Buddhism here, where a phrase in Buddhism is that hope and fear chase each other's tails. Buddha himself even talked about there being three kinds of people: the one who's hopeful, the one who's hopeless, and the one who's done away with hope. Because hope is about being attached to a future desired state where a current sense of dukkha, a current sense of suffering and uncomfortableness and dissatisfactoriness has gone away. So that means you're not just being in the present moment. So the idea, therefore, is that the more hopes you have, the more fears you have, or more fears that you're covering up, rather than just being able to be with. So yeah, there's a mix of issues there with hope.
Yeah, let me just send you. This is someone you really want to meet.
I've enjoyed everybody so far, so wherever
Thank you
I've
all
been.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Andrew. Katie, I'm off now to the retreat, so
Okay.
I can just dash, yeah? Message me on WhatsApp if you need me for something else. Okay, bye-bye. Well done.
You too. Bye-bye.
Oh, noise. I'll do that. Okay, good. Got everything, I think. Good.
Pleasant to meet you.
Welcome back. Hello.
Well, actually,
Glad you made it.
Good, right?
Yeah. So we're at a Buddhist temple, the largest Buddhist temple on the island, and that's because this part of the island has had a bit of a history with Buddhism going back about 1,000 years. So there's some Buddhist villages in the area. I first came here on my own to meditate in July 2020 because I felt I needed to get away. And it was closed at the time, and I just messaged them and said, can I just come on my own? And they said yes. So I had this whole place to myself. This was during lockdown. I was here for 4 days, and I found it really difficult to meditate on my own. So I thought, I want to come back with a group of friends. The reason I do meditation is not to feel bliss, but it's to be more self-aware. So for me, it slows things down. So you notice a feeling in the body, an emotion, a thought. You notice how all that's connected. So it doesn't just all happen. You can just witness it, and so you can unpack it a bit more, and you can see, well, okay, what's in me, what's alive in me, what's happening. And so it means you can be a bit more conscious about what you're doing with your life. All my life I've been a bit spiritually curious, but I think by about the age of 21 I became very interested in all other ancient philosophies and spiritual traditions. It really, for me, it made perfect sense for that experience I had of transcending the ego and entering a spirit of universal love, which I'd had through Christianity. But what does that mean? Like, how do you stay in that space? And I realized that, so the Buddhist analysis, that the aspect of me that thinks I exist and I must be validated and I must be good, and isn't it good if I can believe that I'll exist forevermore? You know, it helped me understand that that's the desperation of the ego facing fundamental impermanence, the flow of life and death. Everything comes, everything goes. So it was this sort of desire to order and control and defend. It's all it's fear-based, rather than just accepting I'm an aspect of the flow of life.
As a human being, if there's an existential threat that you're being presented with, then I think there can be feelings of overwhelming fear, and therefore, you know, it's easier to hide and deny. And but if you're part of an active community, then you can organize together, and you can, but most importantly, rather than organize, you share the burden, emotional burden of the awfulness, the tragedy, the despair, the heartbreak. And if you don't have that, well then, we know as human beings, it's a survival mechanism with us that we shut down to that. If you can't share it, then of course you can't deal with it. So then there's no action. But action comes from being able to really meet your feelings with others. Yeah. A few weeks later, the Extinction Rebellion logo was signed off, and we had our declaration of rebellion in Parliament Square. From that point onwards, most of my working energy went into Extinction Rebellion. One of the terms we came up with in the visioning of Extinction Rebellion, the visioning work, was to think of ourselves as activators. Sure, activists is in there. Many of us are long-term activists, but as an activator, it's more about activating energy.
The police will now make arrests. Please continue singing. Please continue to be calm. You're doing an amazing job.
In facing into this disaster, there has been so much creativity and so much learning, so much growth, that's been a wonderful thing. Yeah.
This time, for the first time, I had terrible allergies. I think maybe because there's fires. I know that the rubbish dump is on fire in Bali. I don't know where that is. So I ended up having to take an antihistamine just this morning. But yesterday I was suffering all day. So because of that, it reminded me of my childhood. I was a sickly child. I had really bad eczema. And that affected me. That meant that I was not sort of participating in life as much as the other children. Yeah, sometimes it was really bad. Like I couldn't even bend my legs. It was so bad. So then I was reflecting on that and thinking, how did that shape me? I knew it made me more intellectual because I could be less physical as a kid. But I didn't realize that I had assumed, therefore, that I know how to bear suffering. I know how to bear pain in a way that others don't. So I'd realized I'd been looking at my friends, kids, we're talking about like 10 years old, and they all had healthy bodies and were having fun, and I was having difficulties at that time. I didn't know this had happened, and I still don't know quite how I feel about it, but I had rationalized my suffering as, well, at least now I know how to cope. I can look at pain. So I look at what I've been, I think that's also why by the age of 15 I became an environmentalist, because I could look at the suffering in the world. I know that most of the people I'm interacting with at this meditation retreat haven't really thought much about the ecological predicament or what's already, the damage that's been done and what's to come. I do believe that for some of them, the tools they have through insight meditation will help them when the full scale of the tragedy reaches them, either through an awareness of what's happening or through experiencing them in their own lives, a catastrophe or something scary. Meditation can cultivate equanimity. Buddhist philosophy can help people with their equanimity, so that they are not they're not indifferent to all the suffering, but they can notice their fear, they can notice their compassion, and they can see these as valid emotions. I mean, compassion, wonderful emotion. some people think I'm categorical about what's to come, and I say, well, no, I'm not. I know what's to come is not this. And there's going to be a lot of suffering as what this is, modern life that we lead, industrial consumer lifestyles. As that breaks down, there'll be a lot of suffering. And part of that suffering will be the unknown. Like, the way I live, the way I earn my money and go to the supermarket and all that's breaking down. We don't know what's to come. That's scary. But we can become less scared of the not knowing what's to come. I think people who say, no, everything's going to go, human species going extinct, definitely. They're also trying to find a kind of a false calm in certainty. There's nothing more beautiful than not knowing, because it means we just have to let go of the ego's need to exist and to map and control and plan and reassure self and other. So it's magical that we just simply don't know. So an aspect of Western modern culture, this assumption that progress is good and will happen forevermore, is this sort of compulsion to be optimistic. I'm more tuning back into what feels right to do for me at this time, and I'm inviting other people to realize their assumptions of progress and therefore the assumption of the compulsion to be positive, hopeful, optimistic. But when pushed, I can say what I'm optimistic over. I'm more than optimistic that as many people wake up to our predicament, they will discover themselves to be more courageous, loving, and creative than they ever thought possible. I know I'm more than optimistic because I see that happening already.